The City of Moscow Administrative Committee, we're meeting a little early this week because there's no Public Works Finance Committee meeting. Filling in for John Weber, to my right is Walter Steed. To my left is Jim Boland. To his left is City Supervisor Gary Riedner, and I'm Dan Carscallon. First up on the agenda is the minutes of the May 26th, 2015 meeting.
And I was not a participant, so I have no comment.
I would vote to approve the minutes.
We'll consider them approved then. Next up, Dwight Curtis is going to ask or forward a request from the Moscow Charter School for HERC rental fee waiver.
Yes. And this is for next school year, 2015-2016.
Okay.
There is a slight change to the present year. It's about 3 hours more a week that they're requesting. They added on 8th grade out there, so it needs a little more time. It's during the same time frame that we've had in previous years, has had really no impact on services that we provide in the public, and have had 0 complaints. And it is only half the gym. We keep the rest open for the rest of the citizens. And so that's their request for this year. It has gone through the Parks and Rec Commission, and they recommended approval. Also, in reciprocation, as you know from past years, they've always offered rooms over at their school for some of our programs. This year, matter of fact, right now, they have an aerobic or a robotics camp going on.
There's a difference.
Place over there. Yes.
It's just a
little bit of difference, yeah. So anyway, that's the request. Tony's here, the principal, if you have any questions of that nature. And
Walter.
Do you remember how many years we've allowed this a year at a time? It's been quite a few.
At least
2005,
yeah,
2004.
8 years, not 10 years maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been a long. Yeah, it's been a long time.
And I think you said the public hadn't had any problem with it. Has staff had any problem with it?
No.
Okay.
So there's been no conflicts.
No.
I have no problem with it.
Jim?
No, neither.
All right, let's go ahead and forward this
Consent
for
agenda.
consent agenda for approval.
Yes, sir. Mr. Dwight?
We're done already?
Yeah.
You're just efficient, Dwight.
Thank you.
All right, next up is the proposed amendments of Title IV, Chapter 3, and the Legacy Crossing Design Guidelines to amend off-street parking and window opening requirements. Mike Ray is going to present that to us. Good afternoon.
Afternoon, gentlemen. So, just wanted to give you a brief report on a upcoming ordinance and resolution that will be coming to council in a couple weeks, and it's for the off-street parking and window area amendments within the urban mixed commercial and legacy crossing area. And so, just to give you a quick recap of what we had done in legacy crossing, currently you have 3 aspects: urban mixed commercial zone, which is the commercial zone that we had created specifically for that area, has allowed uses, has building heights, setbacks, things of that nature, which are defined within that zone. You also have the Legacy Crossing Design Guidelines, which is the design guideline document, which goes through building our facade articulation, major pedestrian pathways, roadway alignments within Legacy Crossing, things of that nature. And you have a overlay district, which is responsible to lay out the process for the design guidelines review by Planning and Zoning Commission, and so lays out kind of the public hearing and review process for the guidelines. So earlier this year, we went through the Moscow Urban Renewal Agency, the RFP process for 3 projects that were on the corner of 6th and Jackson. And it was kind of a dry run for us because this was the first set of projects that we had reviewed within that area using the design guidelines. And there were a couple aspects of the design guidelines that we had noticed maybe could use some updating. First was the off-street parking. We have specific off-street parking within the urban mixed commercial zoning district. We also have specific off-street parking within the Legacy Crossing design guidelines, and we realized that it could be confusing to some people that are utilizing the design guidelines. So proposing to amend both documents and insert the table which is currently within the design guidelines document, insert that into the urban mixed commercial zoning district, make a slight amendment to the residential use requirement for their off-street parking within that table, and so that would be the crux of the amendments for the off-street parking. End result is that it'll be a little bit more user-friendly for people utilizing the design guidelines and make it clearer. Second aspect is the window opening area requirements within the design guidelines, and this requires certain facades that front public streets or pedestrian ways to have a certain percentage of window openings on their facades. And so it's 50 to 85%. We were surprised when we were looking at the proposed conceptuals how close they were getting to 50%. You know, they were exceeding that requirement, so most of them met the 50 to 85%, but they were 55, 56%, so a little close. And also we have the recent market analysis within Legacy Crossing in the downtown area that shows maybe a high market potential for residential uses, medical office uses, things of that nature, which might not be, you know, we might not end up with retail on the bottom floor, and so it could be a challenge for those residential uses or office uses in order to meet the 50 to 85% and still provide some type of privacy. We also have a number of uses within urban mixed commercial zone other than retail uses. So we have those residential and office, some institutional type uses which may present challenges. So we're proposing to allow a little bit of flexibility there, and for uses other than retail, reduce that to a minimum of 35% just to give some flexibility there. So Planning and Zoning Commission did conduct a public hearing on these amendments on May 13th, and they recommended approval as presented of the ordinance and the resolution. And like I mentioned before, this is going to be forward for public hearing at the council's upcoming July 6th, 2015 meeting. So with that, I'd certainly be able to answer any questions that you might have.
Walter?
Mike, you made a comment that you were surprised how close to the 50% some proposed projects you've reviewed, how close they came to the 50%?
Correct.
But I don't understand what you mean, that they didn't have 100%, they were way down at close to 50, or were you surprised that they weren't down at 20% and they got it up to 50? I'm not sure.
Well, just
I'm with you until you made that comment, and then I'm thinking, what?
Well, just looking at the proposed facades,
Okay.
you know, ones would appear that they have a large, you know, large windows, you know, large number of window and door openings, and then when you actually calculate the openings compared to
when you do the math,
they come out to be, you know, visually it appears that maybe they're in 65, 70% range, but when you actually do the math with the solid surfaces, it comes out to be about 52 to 55%. So that's where the kind of the surprise came in.
Go ahead.
There's a comment in the packet that in an area that is promoting reducing the amount of surface parking and creating more urban mixed-use walkable developments, the off-street parking requirements for residential uses would appear to have the opposite effect. So reducing the amount of required parking would believe to be encouraging people not to have cars that have apartments or businesses there. I mean, it's almost, and this may be what you want, it's almost like if we only build a 2-lane highway, we'll have less cars trying to get to Boise. Is that kind of what we're doing? It seems.
Well, in that area right now, we have a 50% reduction in the required parking.
Okay.
So developments could provide the maximum. You know, they could provide whatever the code requires normally. So they'd be able to utilize that still. It's just allowing them to cut that in half for those types of uses and it's implied that maybe they would make some type of mode change instead of use automobiles. It's closer to the university and downtown, so maybe they choose just not to have a car, and they choose alternate modes of transportation, walking, biking. It is close to downtown, so downtown we don't have any off-street parking requirement. It's just assumed that the city parking lots that we provide public parking at takes care of that off-street parking requirement. And so it's really envisioned in Legacy Crossing that the majority of the off-street parking is going to be on-street with parallel spaces on the road network.
Don't you envision we'll be having to create public parking lots like we are now because we don't have on-site parking for downtown? So in order to get empty spaces in front of the storefronts, we've got public parking lots back in the back in order for people to put their cars somewhere. I mean, I'll go along with this, but I'm just trying to question the rationale a little bit. It's almost like questioning why would you take the Moscow-Pullman Highway from a 2-lane to a 4-lane when we've got a great bike path next door. If we leave it 2-lane, more people will bike to Pullman. But I don't believe it.
Jim?
I am supportive of the change because I think in that area we're trying to encourage people to use alternate modes of transportation rather than cars. It's not like, if you could teleport people to Boise, you could probably have a 2-lane road, and people would probably participate in that. We would encourage that if it was available. So I think in this instance, if you don't require so much off-street parking, you make more space available for other amenities. That's how I see it.
But we're also not saying you can't build parking.
Right. If you want more parking, you can have it. But if you'd rather have some green space there instead or something else, then you can do that. So I think it gives the developer more flexibility. And I don't think parking is necessarily that big of a deal in that location. So I would support it.
Well, this is for, we're going to have a public hearing on this on the 6th.
Yes.
So I don't know if we need to make any recommendation or anything. We'll just forward it to council.
Kind of say, okay.
And the resolution, why is the resolution there on top of the ordinance?
The design guidelines document's approved by resolution, and so in order to amend that document, we need to pass another resolution, and so that's why that's there.
So that's the guidelines, not necessarily part of the ordinance.
Yeah, we have an ordinance for the urban mixed commercial, and then resolutions for the design guidelines.
Okay.
Correct.
All right. We'll forward that on to council for the 6th. Thank you. And Mike gets to come back for a proposed amendment to Title IV, Chapter 3, which is the same chapter we were on before, to allow additional outdoor uses within commercial zoning districts.
Thank you. So just to give you a little bit of background on this one item, which will be coming to council in a couple weeks, just like the off-street parking and outdoor or window area requirements. In summer 2014, the police department received numerous complaints on an outdoor concert music venue that was, the property was at the edge of the central business zoning district, within the central business zone, at the edge of a R4, which is multifamily residential area. And so they were getting numerous complaints. The property was currently in the process of renovation, and so they were doing this outside in the parking lot, and had received those complaints. The police department had come out there, and really they handled it through the public nuisance noise prohibition. So if you're affecting the peaceful enjoyment of another individual in town, there could be some type of noise nuisance that could be handled through the police department in that circumstance. We also have noise source requirements, so a certain decibel level measured at the property line. You can't exceed that within certain hours. And so they were able to regulate this activity through those mechanisms. They also had the ability of an amplified sound permit to exceed those. I believe that maybe one or two of those was issued, and then after they kept on receiving complaints, no longer issued those. So the use really had just ceased to exist after that. It started to become fall, and we really had no more issues. But staff wanted to be proactive because we did have some inquiries from the complainee on this, and we had taken it to Planning and Zoning Commission last October to have them review it. And when we brought it up, they really thought that the existing noise and nuisance ordinances were sufficient enough to handle this type of activity throughout town, and we really didn't need to maybe look into regulating more outdoor uses within the zoning code. But they did go through all the allowed outdoor uses across all commercial zoning districts, and one of the items that they did mention, or they did notice, was outdoor seating areas for restaurants, and that's primarily within the neighborhood business zone. I wanted staff to do a whole review of all the zones to take a look at if we had any more conflicts. We had done that, and it was really just the neighborhood business zoning district where we had seen restaurants allowed, but not outdoor seating areas for restaurants specifically allowed within that zone. We also have some other just minor cleanup issues when we added the urban agriculture ordinance. Wanted to make sure that somebody didn't want us to construe community garden, market garden, things of that nature for outdoor uses that were not allowed, because typically they are. And so just a few cleanup actions, but the main crux of the ordinance is to allow outdoor seating areas for restaurants within the neighborhood business zoning district. And so this was reviewed by Planning and Zoning Commission, and they did conduct a public hearing once again on May 13th, 2015, and they recommended approval of the ordinance as presented, and this item will be coming before council on July 6th, 2015. I'd certainly be able to answer any questions that you might have.
Jim?
Mike, there were no changes in the noise ordinance where you can have outdoor music till 9 o'clock unless you have a permit till 10. Someone could still obtain a permit. On these frictional areas where it's right against a residential area, they could still obtain a permit to play outdoor music till 10 o'clock if they wanted to.
Correct. Yeah, that's all in place. We're just proposing to go in and just clean a few things up and within the zoning code, and that's still in Title 10, which is the police regulations. So there's no change there.
Go ahead.
So where this started with noise, this doesn't address noise.
Doesn't address noise.
This addresses something else.
Yep. Staff just wanted to be proactive and if they were going to continually to have these outdoor uses that may be problematic, it's really just a result of having a central business zone adjacent to a residential zone, and you're going to have these types of nuisances come up every once in a while. But Planning and Zoning Commission felt that our existing noise and nuisance ordinances were sufficient enough to deal with those types of random activities. So.
Well, regarding the restaurants and outdoor seating, personally, I would rather handle outdoor seating on a case-by-case basis rather than changing the neighborhood business zoning district to just blanket allow it. I'd rather have, if there's a restaurant that would like to create, because, Gary, we used to do that, even in the downtown, didn't we? Do I remember downtown where individual businesses came to us and wanted to create a sidewalk cafe
Exactly.
space?
Until we addressed it by ordinance.
Till you changed it to because it worked okay for one or two places, and then we changed it for the whole area was allowed to do that.
Exactly.
Correct? I would rather stay in the neighborhood business with an individual approval, request and approval, until we see if we've got some that works, and then we
As
can.
is proposed under the ordinance, you're comfortable with that? Is that what you're saying?
No, under the ordinance is opening the gate.
Yeah, E2, I guess, is the allowance for outdoor dining areas.
Just does it.
It-
And what I'm saying is I'd prefer to have it on an individual request and approval basis. And if we see it works in neighborhood business after one or two of them or so, then we could look at changing it so that just anybody can.
I think the issue you're going to run into is what makes one neighborhood having it available and one neighborhood not having it.
The city
available.
council.
I mean, I can understand what Walter's saying. What was the impetus for allowing it all through the central business district? That what makes it that one business can do it and one business can't? Was that why we went broad?
The issues downtown were that It was use of the public right-of-way. That was the main thing. This isn't use of the public right-of-way. So it had to do with that. There are also the noise to consider, and in a downtown area, typically your residential is more subdued than it is in a neighborhood business situation. I see Bill's come forward. So those are just some of the issues that addressed it downtown.
Bill?
I think Gary covered the point I was just going to make, is the city council approvals for the commercial use of the public right-of-way. This is not in the public right-of-way as proposed in the neighborhood business district. This would be upon private property. If you were going to address it as a land use perspective, then you could insert it as a conditional use permit, and then that would have to go to the Board of Adjustment with a public hearing for the establishment of an outdoor dining area. In our view, this is a very common activity in neighbor business districts, whether it's like the Hyde Park area in Boise or others, where you have a lot of restaurants that have outdoor seating as part of their offerings. And we aren't talking about bars in this case. It would only be restaurants, and that's the only permitted and allowed use in a neighborhood business district.
But you're still creating the outside potential noise problem in our neighborhood.
Sure.
Potentially, correct.
Well, I guess, I don't know if we want to have, I mean, really, the only change you're suggesting would be to strike that number 2 in the E.
Correct.
So
I don't have a problem with the rest of it.
So I say we'll go ahead and forward this to the full council and have the discussion there.
And we'll be able to address that. I'll ask Rod to take a look at it as well. Again, the issues are enforceability, why one business gets it, another business doesn't. If you have someone next door who complains to one business, does that complainant get to regulate the use of that business's use of their property?
Well, if I may, Gary, it's like the police department are giving noise
exemptions
to a particular property. That was what started all this.
For a limited time.
Which they did, and then at some point they decided we're not going to give you those anymore because we're getting complaints about it. So it's not like I mean, if we're picking on somebody, yeah, we're picking on them because we got a problem with it.
Well, I would recommend to the council that Bill's exactly right. If you're planning on allowing a discretionary function in the zoning code, that's why we have the Board of Adjustment. So I don't think you want to, this isn't like use of public property, like you come in and if you want to have alcohol in the park, you have to specifically address the council, what are you going to use it for, how are you going to mitigate that, protect the public. Same thing for the ordinance just passed with having a beer garden in the public right-of-way. This is a situation where I don't think you want to have every neighborhood business restaurant coming before the council setting out their particular.
How many have we got?
You set things up for the long term and for all situations. And if you've already got a mechanism for doing it, why not allow Board of Adjustment to do that?
But you're still saying strike it from here, have it as a condition?
It could be a conditional use.
Yeah, if you wanted to have these reviewed on a case-by-case basis, then we would remove it from E2. We would add a item D5, and we would just essentially move the outdoor dining areas for restaurants as a new D5. Sure. That would then become a conditional use, and any restaurant in a neighborhood business district would have to go to the Board of Adjustment, have a hearing that's noticed to everybody within 600 feet of the property in order to have an outdoor dining area approved.
And that also, can be, should the board deny it, can be appealed to council.
It can be appealed to the council. The board can place conditions upon it. If it's that does provide an opportunity to look at it on a case-by-case basis. And if that's not what was considered by the Planning and Zoning Commission, but certainly as the ordinance comes to the council during the hearing process, the council can choose that we'd like to see it be offered in a different way. Right. It could either be passed on first reading with that amendment request, come back on second, and then be approved by the council.
I don't think, does it need to go back to P&Z if the council makes that change?
I don't believe so.
Council could pass it on that basis.
The council can pass it on that basis if you want to get to the hearing. I mean, what I'd like to do is present the ordinance as it was heard by the Planning and Zoning Commission. The council could then decide to pass it with that amendment and to pass it on first reading, and then we could come back and, well, it's actually kind of a simple enough amendment. We could probably pass it.
Yeah, if the council wants, we could prepare an amendment if you'd like us to have that in our pocket, and then you could pass it
Yeah,
on
maybe
if you wanted.
If you just prepare, because you're basically just moving it,
It's not difficult to do.
yeah, it's just a, that page. If
The
you
other-
guys come with that, that would be, that way we'd have that option.
The other thing that process does is allows someone who's anticipating maybe purchasing a business, or they could come in, have that predetermination made before they invested money in the business as well.
I personally like the way it is now because everybody knows where they stand, and it doesn't separate somebody out from anybody else. If you have a neighborhood business and you want to have outdoor seating, I don't see how that necessarily means you're going to have noise problems, or I don't see the downside of that.
Mhm.
I think it's more, I think it's unnecessarily restrictive to ask people to come for this particular
more
item.
step?
Yeah.
Well, and
I would
like I say,
move
we'll,
to present it as it is written.
yeah, I say bring it both ways, and then we'll present it to the council as this, and then,
Okay.
Walter will, of course, bring it up.
Okay.
Here's the other option, and then
We can do that.
we'll have a cage match out.
In the octagon.
There you go.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Mike.
Next up is City of Moscow interfund investments for airport realignment. And Don Palmer is going to come up and give it to us in the simplest way possible. And that's an order.
Well, I was asked to kind of give a synopsis about the history of this a little bit. So a year ago tomorrow, we started doing memorandums of different financing options. One of them was a general obligation, and then we went through and came up with this one being the best option, which is a lower cost of borrowing and in the amount of $2.5 million. Now, where that came from is Gary Reedner, our city supervisor, and Mayor Lambert went to Washington, D.C. and negotiated a lower rate from 10% to 8.25%. Or 8.125.
Did you indicate to the people watching, the thousands of people watching this on television, that we're talking about the airport?
I should do that.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether you did or not.
This project. Okay, so this project is a realignment project, and it's grant funded for $119 million total project cost. With what I started to mention was the background about the grant match, which was 10%. And again, Mayor Lambert and Gary Reedner, city supervisor, went back to Washington, D.C. We successfully reduced the rate, the match, to 8.125, which of that amount on $119 million is $9,750,000 roughly. And I calculated that based on $120 million back then. And so, and then in late July, we came up with this lower cost of option. Some cities have already done that, and we did some research about interfund investments, and so we've done that. I have a resolution that identifies where our current policies and resolutions that we already have in place allow us to do this, what statute allows us also to do this, and provides that funding over to be repaid through the foregone amount that we had approved in last August 18th of last year's budget for the current fiscal year that we're in now. Okay, and what that was at the time was, I think, $228,000 of foregone amount, and then we used some construction monies that are also able to be taxed to bring it up to the $250,000 over 10 years. So the repayment schedule is over 10 years. The cash flow that we need is dependent upon the grants. Some grants will speed up. Land purchases is going to be the first. Well, we've already gone through a first phase, which was the environmental assessment. Now they're going through the process of purchasing land or negotiating on land sales or land swaps. And so that's part of the grant that's going to be happening soon, and there are going to be spurts of these different grants as we go through the project, okay? And they're figuring the project will be about 5 years, which is what the cash flow statement that I had built last year had a premise on. We use a very simple methodology in doing that at $500,000 a year for the first 5 years. It could be faster or slower depending on the match.
Okay, I'll put on the brakes here a little bit. 500,000 a year.
For 5 years, $2.5 million. And I should mention the $2.5 million is the contribution that the City of Moscow and the City of Pullman would match an equal amount for a total of $5 million. The difference coming from various sponsors, University of Idaho, Washington State University, several of the counties, and then private partners, which there's a strategy in place where the mayors and some of the Gary and some of the others will be going after and talking to different individuals about that. Arms. So, yeah, well, hopefully we can get that done, because without those contributors, we won't be going forward. It's really important.
Kind of contingent on that plan as well.
Well, it has to, because we can't do any more. We've tried to figure out how much we can leverage, and 2.5 is the most both cities can match. So that really remains the rest, and Gary can look at it.
Don, you lost me just a little bit in the math.
Okay.
You're calling it investments. I consider it borrowing. You're talking about investing enterprise funds. I'm talking about borrowing from enterprise funds. But it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. And you're talking about $500,000 a year for 5 years. However, a year ago, the City Council authorized taking $228,000 of foregone,
yep,
plus some change to make up $250,000. Is that on top of the $500 a year for 5 years?
Okay, so there's two pieces to the.
I'm confused how that fits in.
Sure. So the math is that the expenditure rate is 5 years, $500,000, $2.5 million in expenditures. The revenue to repay
that's borrowed from enterprise funds, water and sewer.
Water, sewer, sanitation,
okay.
Capital, payroll service fund, even the general fund,
okay,
if there's monies available to do that. So anyway, so what we're trying to do is loan monies against the general fund is where the target fund is, where we currently have a non-departmental, the airport development expenditures. Okay, so all those expenditures would come out of general fund. So the resource would come from the other funds into the general fund. The general fund, now the $250,000 is over 10 years. That's the property tax amount to make up the 2.5 that we'd spend in 5 years. So it's going to take a longer time to repay that. Now the cash flow is such that we will never need to borrow $2.5 million. We've already collected. By the end of August, we'll have collected almost $250,000 this year. So we've already started that process, and now that we're getting close and commencing with this loan by August 1, and we would flow those funds to the City of Pullman because they're the agent of record for the airport, and we would pay them, and they would manage the grant aspects with the.
So I'm still confused.
Okay.
The $250,000 that we did a year ago.
Yes.
Is that the first payback to the loan we have yet to make?
Let me float this to you. Excuse me. That's a.
I understand. I understand the borrowing.
Sure.
I'm just confused about what we've already done in
Sure.
FY 2015.
Okay, so the reason we started this last year is that in order to collect taxes, it's always in the ensuing year. Right. So our first tax receipt was in January for a portion of it. The rest of it's going to be late July, early August for the second piece of it. And then there's people pay late, so they trickle in after that. That's the $250,000 for year one, is this year we'll receive that. We're also going to spend out $500,000 this year.
That we will borrow from the enterprise funds.
That we'll borrow only a quarter of it.
Only $250 from the.
Only $250 this year, because we have $250 this year.
Okay, I don't think you said that. I
think
that's what I was fishing for.
Okay.
It's a 5-year project, 5 to 6 year project. So our contribution has to be our $2.5 million contribution that the council essentially said we will resolved to do, that's our policy, we're going to do that, we need to come up with $2.5 million in that 5-year period. The foregone amount that Don's referred to generates about $250,000 a year, or will by the time the 3% is applied to it. So that's current tax generation in the budget year. Then we supplement that with a $250,000 investment or loan from the accumulated enterprise fund, personal service fund, any of those funds, to make a $500,000 match payment. Then we do that for 5 years. After that, the taxes that continue to be generated.
I'm interrupt you. You're not going to do the same thing for 5 years because you don't have foregone to go after.
Exactly.
It's been used up. You'll have to take a full 500 from the enterprise funds.
No, the foregone amount continues year after year.
Yeah,
Oh, okay. That's where I'm
Once
lost.
it's on, it's added on.
And then after the
Okay.
5th year,
Okay.
then the amount that's generated with that foregone amount will go to pay back the enterprise funds for the ensuing 5 years.
Okay.
So that's why the package will be completed in 10 years. Our payments on the match will be done within 5 years. And as Don indicated, looking at it, the code allows it. The interest rate that's being provided to the accumulated funding entities is actually in excess of the local government investment pool. So that is it's a good investment grade decision.
Yeah.
But it's not pegged to the investment pool. It's a set 2.5%.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. What I did there was I just said, okay, an example I used last year was what did we pay for our DEQ loans? It was a certain amount. And all of our other bond monies for revenue bonds have been around 4%. So what I'm proposing in this resolution is to set 2.5% on the outstanding balance. Now, the reason it varies, I couldn't just come up with an amortization schedule and say, here it is, $2.5 million, because we don't know the speed of what the grants will
We could be
do.
paying
And so,
100 in 1 year and 400 the next, depending on how the project goes.
yeah, we anticipate $500,000 as soon as this happens on August 1, and then another $500,000 on October 1, and then because of the retail of the land, we don't know what that's going to be going at. So
since we're essentially borrowing from ourselves, kind of, if the other players don't step up, this is all just for.
No, it's all just spent.
Well,
Nothing
it
spent.
doesn't get spent.
If I may. One of the things that the FAA has granted the authority to move ahead with this project. The original estimate was $89 million, and that's what we based it upon. But applying what the expected cost of construction, inflation, that sort of thing, they put an upper amount. We asked our engineers to come up with an amount that they thought would be the maximum that it could be or expected to be. They put that number at $119 million.
Trying to go worst case.
Exactly. And the FAA indicated that they likely would go ahead and fund that. One of the I'm trying to get back to your question.
Does it go away if
Yes,
the
exactly.
other guys don't play?
They are a series of grants, so each grant is an opportunity to make the match. So if it turns out that other entities don't participate, that we can withdraw at any time. But Walter's correct, funds that have been expended will have been
But
expended.
we might have more, the airport might have more land. We'll get to that point, but then, well, we're not going to be able to do the runway. 'Cause
Precisely.
We couldn't go to that next step.
You need to, and
Just for example, I don't know if that's the exact
It is still,
breaks, but-
it is still something that is being worked upon. The Mayor Pullman, Mayor Lambert, Tony Bean, the airport manager, and support staff have or are making visits to all the other entities. As we explained back last August 4th when we had our an additional public hearing for the FY 2015 budget, and we explained that the City of Moscow and the City of Pullman are the sponsors for the FAA grant. Even though the University of Idaho and WSU might use the airport extensively and thereby, because it aids their institution, should be expected to participate, since they're not sponsors, the FAA does not require them to be sign on the bottom line, if you will. The counties as well, and of course, we have private businesses that also use the airport extensively.
And I understand don't like the price of this project, but that's beside the point at the moment. Dan's, and I did, my mistake was not realizing the foregone.
Keeps going on.
We get it every year.
Yeah.
All right, thank you for straightening me out on that. The 8.125% match that requires, Gary, of the upper, and with a project like this, I say that with quotes around it, 120,000.
Million.
120 million requires a $9,750,000
Yes.
match, which at Moscow Pullman is almost $5 million each. It's been a year since the council was brought this story of all these entities that are going to contribute to this match. And as far as I know, not a single other entity than Moscow and Pullman have done anything in their budgets to move toward this. I mean, and if they have, tell me. I mean, I've asked the county commissioners about it, and all I kind of get is kind of a blank stare. I mean, they don't say, oh, yeah, we're going to do it, or, oh, yeah, we've been talking about it, oh, yeah, anything. They don't tell me they're not. But I kind of get this kind of owl look like,
Well, really? Yeah, there are several factors, and Don's being very complimentary about the mayor and my lobbying of our federal legislators. It actually is the state of Washington, and our counterparts on the other side of the line did a lot of the heavy lifting on the thing. But we did get it reduced, which was a great coup. Walter, you're exactly right. There are things that are going on that are impacting this, and that is individual budgets, of course. As sponsors, I think the city of Moscow moved very quickly and made the commitment early on. City of Pullman...
we were before Pullman.
Absolutely. And Pullman has not issued a resolution or anything on it. They put everything in place, and they're moving ahead, no doubt about it. There are...
They're not even ink on the line?
No. They are.
Okay.
They are, but they have not. It isn't like there was okay, we're issuing this resolution that says categorically we're doing this. We placed it in our budget is how we did it. But the City of Moscow and City of Pullman are in as equal partners. We continue and will continue to contact these other folks. But you're exactly right. Nobody has said, okay, we're in for this amount, we're in for this amount yet.
Go ahead.
And yet in the resolution, the next to last whereas says, as a sponsor with the city of Pullman pertaining to the airport, cities, meaning Moscow's, commitment will be to participate equally in the financial aspect with our partner to ensure the realignment occurs.
Yes.
That to me says, and by the way, if nobody else plays, we're in for $4,875,000. I won't vote in the positive for that. Not going to happen.
All I can say is, and I certainly on next Monday night, I'm sure the mayor will have comments. 2 weeks. And all I can say is it's a long process. Obviously, we have received, I might just mention, we have received positive feedback from through the city of Pullman and their contacts and those that Mayor Lambert has talked to. We've received positive feedback, but nobody has signed on the bottom line and said this is the exact amount we will pay.
No, this is like we have.
Absolutely. And we did it because we had to obligate the grant from the FAA.
Pullman has, though, haven't they?
Yeah, Pullman has.
Because they had to obligate
right.
as well.
Yeah.
So, I've worked with the finance director there for over a year on this project, and we've been working very close together with this $5.0 million trying to get this ironed out.
Yeah, don't interpret what I said as that Pullman has not committed. Pullman has committed.
So we've been working on that for a year. So in tandem with them, it's the commitments that and there's a plan that Mead and Hunt has set out, and the mayors are going to get together and work on the other pieces of it. It's instrumental for the success of the project to happen that way.
You know, one final comment on that part of it. This is what I do. I've done this for 35 years. I've worked on funding projects. We've never pulled the trigger until the financing was secured.
Jim.
This one seems to be, we're doing that, and we're going to start buying land, and we don't have all the financing lined up, but we've got this little clause stuck in here that regardless, Moscow and Pullman are going to fund this thing. And that gives me major heartburn with this because this is being brought to us as a method, a process for raising $2.5 million. But built into that resolution is virtually an asterisk, yes, but.
Yeah, and that whole recital can be taken out. This is an internal document that memorializes the council's policy of borrowing, investing, whatever you want to call it, from those cash accumulations. It is not intended to make a statement about our commitment to the project.
It is.
It's a
It does.
I'm saying that can be, if that is what's giving you heartburn, that can be taken out. It's not necessary for the mechanics of this transaction.
Are we not obligating future councils, Gary, in this?
Council,
Which we by statute are not allowed to do?
the council at any time can choose not to go forward with funding. There is no penalty for doing so. If the council does not choose to go ahead and provide further match, the council can choose not to. It's very similar to a non-appropriation clause. And that is that you have every intent, and we sign contracts, council authorizes contracts all the time. For instance, our contract with Whitcomb, our contract with
I understand.
Yeah. And they
yeah.
always have a clause in there that says if the council
next council
chooses
can
not
say-
to appropriate monies, then you may not enforce this contract against us. You will, however, lose your equity that you previously spent.
But that's not in here.
No, it's not, because we aren't appropriating anything. Every year you appropriate it in your budget.
Okay.
Point of interest here, fellas, is that there's a bunch of moving parts on this thing, a 5 to 6 year plan to get this thing done. You've got a number of different players. As Gary had mentioned earlier, the FAA will only recognize 2 sponsoring entities, being 2 cities. We know both universities are going to contribute, the counties as well as Port of Whitman, and possible other business folks. Now, to get it pinpoint exactly who's going to pay what over the next 6 year period is not going to happen in dollars and cents. Just not going to happen. Now, I don't know, Walter, all the different grant writing you've done, if you've had where you've had 6 or 7 different players that have came up with X amount. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't.
And they
I
signed
don't
on the
know.
line before we pull the trigger.
But this is something that is not quite done yet, except for the cities. Now, we do know, because we've spoke to them, University of Idaho, and I spoke to each one of our county commissioners. Now, they have not committed a dollar amount. They are currently working on their budget. And so I look for something to be implemented. Whatever that amount is, I have no idea. It won't be the amount that we're giving. I can clearly tell you that. So, there you have it.
Jim.
I understand Walter's concern about the situation as an analogy. Let's say you're going to build a house and you get enough money together for the foundation, and you put in the foundation and you hope you're going to be able to raise enough money to do the framing, and then you do that and then you run out of money and you got a bunch of sticks sitting on some concrete. We don't want to be in that situation, and I'm with you 100%
And you
on
can
that.
show me some of those houses, because I've seen some of them sitting
there's
around.
gobs of them around.
Yeah, there's one out on the Camas Prairie near Grangeville. A really big one.
But I think what we're doing here is we're putting together the financing for this in some way that we can show that we can come up with this. We're not going to put the money over here, and once we put it there, it just goes away. And we're not going to buy the foundation. Until we get the financing for the entire project put together, I don't think we're going to say proceed. Are we?
Well, you
I
cannot
mean-
proceed until certain things are met. For example, land acquisition, which is not done yet. What happens if one of the parties say no to it? The deal's done. It's off. So there's a bunch of moving parts on this thing. It's not a cut and right thing.
So let me ask Don, if we put our I'll just pick the number, $5 million. We put our $5 million, and Pullman puts theirs in some sort of an escrow towards this thing. I assume that's how that's going to work. And everybody else, and then we find out, look, we've got our money here, and then we get the county and the universities and the private players to come along, and we're not going to start paving any runway until we have all those pieces in place. Is that correct? Well, and then if it doesn't pan out, then it all goes back, right?
Well, that was the hope, but Mead and Hunt has suggested that this land, I guess the FAA, the way they work is that if you've got the money sitting in a bank account for the match, they'll give us $19 million up front for land acquisition, for example. And the other part of the equation is that, and let's say that we only need $1 million of that $2 million in there, okay? What Mead and Hunt has also said that is if there's an airport somewhere in our region that doesn't have the match, that grant funding can flow to our airport, and all of a sudden now we have, instead of 19 million, we have 38 million.
But we still have the same match that we have to meet.
The match is still the same, but the
Still
ability.
have 8.125.
At the end of the day, yes. And so, but the goal you mentioned is yes, we would like to have all of those things in place, and Mead and Hunt is working with the planning aspects with Gary and the two mayors and create a team for this for the gathering of the securing those funds, because all we have now is pledges.
Yeah, I don't think there's, Walter, I think you're correct. There is some risk aligned with this. However, those parties have been contacted. They've indicated they are supportive. There is, and perhaps we haven't done as good a job as we could have in making sure the council's kept up to date of where the financing is, because there are other sources of revenue that are also matching this. There are passenger
Facility charges,
PFCs, that are currently being used to pay for grants for snow removal equipment and some of those things, that when that grant is paid off, they will come to help pay for this. There are the state of Washington also has, the Department of Transportation has an amount of money that they pay every year to the airport. We are currently approaching the Idaho Transportation Department to determine if they will grant some monies to help match this.
And there was some interest in that as well.
Yeah.
Well, but interest,
So there's
interest doesn't put money in the bank, and we haven't seen a performer, Gary. I mean, I've just got problems with this whole thing. I mean, I'd be much happier to go to the citizens of Moscow with a bond vote for Moscow's $5 million match than I would to be doing $2.5 million on we've been talking to people promising.
No,
the
it's
other
$2.5 million. This is not
Right.
a $5 million.
I understand, but I meant what I said.
But if
I'd
we
be
get
much
hooked-
happier going to the citizens to authorize the full $5 million against the 8.125% of the 120 top number, which I almost would bet you a steak dinner is going to be not the top number. But that's another story. So I guess that's what's giving me pause and I see Wayne Krause sitting in the audience, and I remember his comment in August last year, well, we're only putting in a little bit at a time, we can stop at any time. Mm-hmm. Well, the pressure to continue going is going to get greater and greater as we put more and more in. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah, once you build the foundation, then you're pretty much hooked to frame it up,
If you find a way.
Yeah. So, but there's probably alternative ways that we could finance this once the project gets underway and we've acquired the land and you start to build it. There's probably, once you have something tangible, it's probably possible to get financing in some other way.
No, we really do need these pledges to be ironed out, and that's the job of what the mayors are going to be doing, because without that, this project won't go forward. It can't.
Unless we have a general obligation bond to pay the difference.
Well, but then you've got to go out for a vote, and so we tried to keep this in such a way that how could we best do this and expedite it through, and this there's a number of cities that have funded themselves in the same manner that we're doing this now. It's perfectly legal to do. However, this is the most expeditious way and the cheapest way. We're not paying bond attorneys, we're not paying for legal advice, we're not paying for financiers to do the CUSIP numbers and underwriting and all of that costs that go associated with that, which could be over $100,000 in itself.
And
So-
Don, I'm not arguing against your method.
Oh, I understand. And
My
I
problem's
understand.
bigger than that.
Sure, and I get what you're saying.
Yeah, but Gary, he's the one that said legal. Lewiston got in trouble borrowing money from their enterprise funds. Why is this different?
That was a political issue. That was not my understanding of it,
Okay.
is that.
It wasn't a legal problem, it was a political problem.
It was exactly, I got that right from Dan Marsh himself. There are some people against.
They were sued by the citizenry?
He took it from the sanitation fund. And he also wrote things in there to make it callable, okay, which is what I'm recommending. Because two things need to happen. One is, we don't want to jeopardize our operations. That's the number one goal. And we don't want to jeopardize our capital projects. So by calling the bonds, the resolution allows us to say, okay, if the Public Works Director is working on a water project and all of a sudden he needs the monies to build that project, then we can call those bonds and say, well, not bonds, but call the loan in and reinvest it into sanitation or whichever.
Take it from another pocket.
Take it from another pocket. And at any one point, I'm estimating that we won't, at the end of 5 years, we will only need $1.25 million. I just put in the full value of it so that you could see what it is.
But in the end, the citizens of Moscow will have spent somewhere between $2.5 million and $5 million on this project.
No.
Yeah, because the property taxes are going to be raised to pay back the loans.
Well, you said 2.5 to 5. They'll spend 2.5.
2.5 is the current number we're playing with.
That's a match. No.
That's our match.
Yep.
But the open-ended match is almost $5 million.
You're assuming that other sponsors won't contribute.
It's been a year. I haven't seen one yet.
Okay, then I would agree with you.
Rod, did you have something?
No, I'm just on the issue of what happened down in Lewiston. It wasn't really a legal thing. It was a political fight over the library, and some citizens afterwards didn't like the way that they did that, so they implemented or pushed forward an initiative to ban the city from being able to do that, use that tool. Basically just limited themselves.
At the city of Lewiston
Yes.
only.
Yes.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and
Put it on the
forward
regular agenda?
I think we'll have this on the
It's a
regular
regular
agenda
agenda
for
item, I would
discussion,
Okay.
All right.
and we'll see it in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Any
Wayne's
recommendation?
formulating his response already.
Any direction on the resolution itself?
I think,
You're fine.
unless we want to delete that line.
I think
I'm going to raise the same concern over that whereas that says, whereas.
We'll look at-
Whereas in the case nobody else comes forward, we're going to pick it up. I'm going to argue about
Yeah,
that.
the recitals are meant to be descriptive and provide an intent, so that certainly can be taken out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything else for the good of the order
There's
today?
nothing, sir. Thank you.
All right, then we'll consider ourselves adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, gentlemen.